To the Minister for the Environment, Community and Local Government, the removal of pyrite affected homes from the exemption to the property tax. Deputy of 4 minutes.
Actually, I had both the list of the estates as well as the pyrite damaged houses in the request for a topical question. I'd like to thank the Ceann Corda for selecting it. I mean, clearly the legislation, both before Christmas and the amending bill after Christmas, went due in a very hasty way, and it went through in advance of the list of exemptions, or before we had an opportunity to talk to the remediation panel for pyrite. And it was a bit of a dynamite at the core of this last week when the news came through that only about 5,000 houses, very substantially below what was exempted in the household charge, now qualify for an exemption in the property tax. In my own constituency, for example, there's only 17 estates. There were 17 estates were exempt from the household charge. Only 2, and one is a new one, that are exempt from the property tax. I estimate that between the 5,000 for the exempted ones on the unfinished estates list, there's only about 1,000 that are now going to qualify for on the pyrite list, judging by a briefing that we had with the Pyrite Resolution Board last week. And that's only about less than 6,500 houses out of a housing stock that, depending on whose figures you take, it's anything from 1.6 million to 2 million. The census last year, or in 2011, said there was 2 million households. There's been varying discussions about the number, but irrespective, that's a very, very tiny number. Minister, most of the estates have remained inactive, and at the same time you claim that significant progress has been made, yet just 5 million has been expended nationally in making these estates safer. It must be the best value ever. I visited a number in my own constituency over the weekend. Some of them have management companies in addition to being a property tax being imposed. For example, Beach Park in Leaslip had no public lighting right through the winter. The new town hall in Maynooth, the fence around a very large construction site is on the ground, open to children. Uachtarani village in Kilcock, there's boarded up houses that the people themselves had to board up because they were being vandalised, and there's holes all over the road in the estate. Primrose Gate in Selbridge, many estates, it's an estate where the 400 houses have to, in a combined way, pay $250,000 in management company fees, and yet they're not entitled to, they don't get services like street lighting, maintenance. They have to pay for the pump station, for the sewerage. If they've a fault with sewerage, they have to call out a private contractor. They don't get council services, Minister, and you've got to question just exactly what they're getting for the property tax, and that's what they're questioning. There needs to be a revision on the list. It is completely inadequate, and it fails to take account of very significant issues like management companies and unfinished estates. In relation to the pyrite damaged houses, it's very, very limited, the ones that are going to qualify. There's only about 1,000 of the estimated 10,000 houses that were part of the that were identified in the Pyrite panel report. There may well be visible pyrite in some of these houses, but the heave has not reached the level that they'll qualify for remediation, so it appears they're not going to be exempted. The Pyrite Action Group, who were a voluntary group, had a very large number of calls to clarify just exactly what is and what isn't, what qualifies and what doesn't qualify, and it appears that it's only in cases where there's very seriously damaged houses that they will they'll qualify for an exemption. Yet who in their right mind, Minister, would buy a house in the full knowledge that there's pyrite present? The houses are valueless, and that was the point that was to be considered. Can I just finish by saying that I met a couple of people last week who had paid to remediate their homes that had pyrite. They took out extra mortgages. They're not going to get any relief from the remediation board by the looks of it, and neither are they going to get any exemption. Some of those people would have also paid high levels of stamp duty. There's an issue of natural justice, Minister, here that is really being lost in all of this. Leave aside the rights and wrongs and the property tax. These are very serious issues in their own right that probably could have been teased out in a much more thoughtful way had we had time to do so when the legislation was going through.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. Minister, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank you, Deputy Murphy, for raising this issue and allowing me to clarify a few matters. The Finance Local Property Tax 2012 and the Finance Local Property Tax Amendment Act 2013 is the legislation that provides for the number of exemptions from the local property tax. And these include an amendment for certain unfinished housing developments and residential properties that have been certified as having significant pyritic damage. And the list of unfinished housing developments eligible for the exemption was compiled by the local authorities, utilising the categorisation employed for the purposes of the National Housing Survey 2012. And whereas the annual household charge waiver list applied to some 1,322 developments and approximately 43,000 households, the exemption from liability for the local property tax should apply to 421 developments, or approximately 5,100 households. The reduction reflects a number of important changes from the waiver from the household charge. In the first instance, the categorisation itself was different. The list for household charge waiver used a proxy of a list of developments that were characterised by reference to the level of on-site activity at the time that the 2011 survey was carried out, and had less to do with the physical character of a development. Over 20,000 houses theoretically eligible for the 2012 waiver were either not complete or not occupied. It is also the case that some, but by no means all, of the developments previously eligible had been improved very significantly through the work of the government in resolving problems in unfinished housing developments, so they are no longer in such a state as to be regarded as seriously problematic. For purposes of preparing the final list of developments to which the exemption from the local property tax would apply, the local authorities were asked by the Department to confirm or update the then existing list as appropriate. So it was a matter for the local authority, and in your case Kildare County Council, to decide on the continued inclusion or exclusion of particular developments on the list. In terms of the exemption for households affected by pyrite, the methodology for the assessment of dwellings to establish significant pyritic damage will be prescribed in regulations which are currently being drafted. To claim an exemption, a homeowner will have to obtain a certificate from a competent person confirming the presence of significant pyritic damage on the liability date. Now, the certificate will confirm that a visual assessment and a relevant testing of hardcore material has been undertaken. Special arrangements will apply in respect of 2013 and 2014 to facilitate homeowners getting relevant certification to claim an exemption.
First of all, Minister, it appears that the local authorities are being blamed here, but they were given a set of instructions that they worked to, and that set of instructions, let's be absolutely clear, came from either yourself or the government. It wasn't that they made up the rules for themselves. So let's be clear about this. This is not a local authority blaming exercise. The second issue relates to the pyrite, and you know, Minister, if you want to prove that you have pyrite to the degree that where it's visible, you have the competent person that you will get will be an engineer that will come out and do a report. I've seen the bills for those reports where people have got them, and in some cases they run into a couple of €1,000. Now, are you honestly telling me that somebody has to go off and spend €2,000 or more in some cases and get a report that confirms what is plainly obvious, and then they claim an exemption that is multiples less in many cases than the amount that they have expended on the report? Now, that's just daft. And what it is, Minister, is a fig leaf in terms of the exemption that people had an expectation of. There was an expectation that the people who qualified for the household charge, who were talked into, if you like, putting their names on the database and claiming an exemption last year on the household charge, they ticked the box and they claimed an exemption. They now are going to have they would have had an expectation that they would continue to be exempted. The amount of work that has been done for the €5 million is is valuable but very insignificant in comparison to the overall problems on some of these estates. What you haven't taken into account, in some cases some of these estates actually have disimproved over the last year. I can bring you out to places where the security fence that's supposed to keep people outside of the building site has fallen over. I can show you where lights weren't on right through the winter. Those kind of things are not improvements, and apart from anything else, they're very temporary. It has a direct bearing on the value of the properties. In some cases, these properties are of no value because they're not saleable. You'd want to be mad, if you'd want to be mad to be buying something that you know that's going to be problematic into the future.
Thank you,
and just to finish off, Minister, if somebody has to pay a property tax, they have to prove that they've paid the household charge. Well, we saw earlier this year that there was absolute chaos where the local government management association wasn't able to prove who paid and who didn't pay. There was tens of thousands that they admitted that they had made errors on. So this whole thing is going to cause major problems.
Minister, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I know that Deputy Murphy has campaigned against the household charge last year, and 73% paid. So I'm delighted to be I'm delighted once again to be on the side of the silent majority, and you can stay on the side of the negative people who do not want to pay anything in relation to local services, to the household charge. You were. There was no database whatsoever available last year. It was developed through the implementation of the household charge. We now have 1.2 million people registered properly, and there was obviously going to be difficulties and errors made. We acknowledge that. When there was no database available and you're creating a database for the first time, there's obviously going to be difficulties. And there'll be difficulties about the implementation of this particular local property tax as well in the first instance, until such a database is refined and complete for the first time in the history of the state by the Minister of Finance and the Minister of the Environment. And, the 2012 survey, Deputy Murphy, was based purely and objectively on the actual state of completion of a development. It expressly included estates that were deemed by local authorities to be in a seriously problematic condition, regardless of whether a developer was on or off the site. And this year, a clear definition of what was constituted seriously problematic included issues such as the installation and commission of public lighting, the provision of potable water supply, the provision of wastewater collection, treatment and disposal systems, access road to at least base course level, including where required provision for parking, and provision of access to the dwelling by constructed footpath. So these are the instructions that local authorities got, including Kildare County Council. So you can take the matter up with them if they left estates off the list that qualified under that criteria. And the same goes for every member of this House. And the exemption for unfinished housing developments has now been put in place by way of the list I prescribed last week. And what you are advocating is that I change that list. If I change that list or sign it for any other, you would be accused of interfering in a process whereby since 2012 local authorities have been asked to supply the necessary information. The department can't micromanage local government, and we're not intending to do that. When we ask them to do a job, we expect them to do so. And the planning sections have all the information and they have all the inspection criteria based on the necessary circular that was sent down to them. As I stated earlier, the earlier categorisation related largely to the level of on-site activity at the time that the 2011 survey was carried out, and had less to do with the physical character of the development. The 2012 survey was based purely and objectively on the actual state of completion of the development. Now, just briefly, Chairman, I would point out to you that the work carried out by the Government in dealing with the legacy unfinished estate development has been an outstanding success in many instances. With site resolution and the working with the financial institutions and local authorities, 50% less developments or properties now in unfinished developments than compared to the last time a survey was carried out 3 years ago. And could I conclude by saying that in relation to pyrite, nobody has done more than I have in relation to dealing with this issue that was left on the long finger by the previous government in relation to pyrite.
Thank you.
We've identified through a pyrite panel the numbers involved. You cannot expect an exemption from anything unless there's a proven test, and we are working with the Department of Finance to ensure that we get regulations in place that will deal with ensuring that whoever is exempt can show that they have pyrite, and also on the financial implications of providing that test. I'm seeking to work a solution there as well as part of the Pyrite Resolution Board.
Thank you, Minister. The next